Imagine the rhythmic, deafening sound of wooden shields being struck, not in battle, but to deliberately drown out a woman's screams. One man saw it happen. A slave girl, forced to drink until she was delirious, then handed over to an old woman they called the Angel of Death. This isn't a myth. It's from a detailed eyewitness report from 922 CE, long ignored by academics. Now, new forensic evidence from mass graves confirms this account was not an exaggeration. It was a blueprint for ritual murder. Why was this horrifying reality suppressed? Because it reveals a truth far darker than the Viking legends we're sold. It forces us to ask what a woman's life was truly worth. Was she a disposable pawn in a death ritual, a laborer worked until her teeth wore down to the nerve? Or could she be a powerful queen buried in a ship? Uncover the full, disturbing story with us as we reveal the forensic secrets that prove all these lives were part of one brutal, hidden system. That sound, the shield wall of silence, wasn't just for one girl on one riverbank. It's a metaphor for how history has treated the Viking woman. We've been given a curated story, a highlight reel of Lagertha and the Valkyries, a fantasy that sanitizes a reality of unimaginable hardship and systemic violence. We're told of powerful wives who managed great estates and warrior women who fought beside men, and while there is truth in that, it's a sliver of the full picture. The sagas, our main written sources, were composed centuries later by Christian men looking back on their pagan ancestors. They are masterpieces of literature, but they are not objective history. They omit the mundane, the brutal, the inconvenient. They don't tell you about the physical cost of survival, the toll that endless, back-breaking labor took on the female body. They don't speak of the vast numbers of women who weren't wives or warriors, but property. Thralls, slaves, captured in raids, bought and sold like cattle, their lives and bodies subject to the absolute whim of their owners. To find their story, we have to go deeper than the written word. We have to look at the evidence that cannot lie. The human skeleton. Every bone is a record, a medical diary that tells a story of diet, disease, trauma, and toil. And in the last 50 years, scientific breakthroughs in DNA and isotopic analysis have allowed us to read these stories for the first time. These techniques uncover secrets the sagas never could, secrets that powerful figures might have wanted buried forever. To understand the true, secret life of the Viking woman, from the slave to the shield maiden, we must begin where the official story is most loudly told, in the most spectacular female grave ever discovered. We must dissect the lie of the queen to find the truth of the slave. To find the truth about the slave, we must first dissect the lie of the queen, and that investigation begins here, in the year 1904, on a farm in Vestfold, Norway. Buried for over 1,000 years under a massive mound of earth and stone was a sight that would stun the world. The Oseberg ship. This wasn't just a boat, it was a floating masterpiece. A 70-foot vessel of carved oak, its prow arching into the terrifying shape of a serpent. Inside was a treasure trove, a perfectly preserved snapshot of elite Viking life from 834 CE. Exquisitely carved sleighs, ornate animal head posts that seemed to scream from the darkness. Beds, chests, kitchenware, and fragments of priceless silk tapestries depicting strange processions. This is the image we all know. The official story tells us this was the final resting place of a powerful queen, a woman of immense political and perhaps religious authority. A ruler so revered that 15 horses, 4 dogs, and an ox were sacrificed to accompany her into the next world. For a century, this display of wealth has been presented as the ultimate testament to female power in the Viking Age. It is the gold standard, the proof that women could achieve the highest status, and as you look at the sheer artistry, the immense resources required to build this tomb and fill it with treasure, it's easy to believe that story. But this gilded cage was built to hide a terrible secret. While archaeologists marveled at the artifacts, the human remains they found within were, for decades, little more than a footnote. 2 bodies. Both women. The official story labeled them queen and handmaiden. A neat and tidy explanation. But modern forensic science allows us to look past the gold and the carvings and listen to the story the bones themselves are trying to tell. And it is not a story of power. It's a story of disease, of suffering, and of a mystery that raises disturbing questions about the identity of both women. What if this extravagant burial wasn't just a tribute? What if it was designed to conceal a grim reality? The first clues lie in the skeleton of the queen herself, a hidden record of physical agony that no amount of treasure could cure. The treasures of the Oseberg ship were a brilliant distraction. For decades, they blinded us to the real story, the one that begins when you ignore the gold and look directly at the body of the queen. The first shock is her age. Modern osteological analysis reveals she lived to be between 70 and 80 years old, a truly remarkable feat in an era where reaching 40 was a victory. This wasn't just a queen, this was a survivor, a woman who had navigated the brutal politics and hardships of the Viking world for generations. She would have been a figure of immense authority, a living link to the past. But the rest of her skeleton tells us that this long life came at an unbearable price. Her bones were riddled with severe osteoporosis, a condition that would have rendered her skeleton fragile and brittle. Every movement could have risked a fracture, her own body turning into a prison of potential pain. Picture this powerful matriarch, for whom that opulent ship was being built, perhaps unable to even walk without assistance. Her physical authority crumbling away. But it gets worse. Lurking deeper within her remains, forensic analysis uncovered the signature of a far more aggressive enemy. Advanced, metastatic cancer. This wasn't a sudden illness. It was a slow, creeping invasion that had spread throughout her body. While her people saw a revered leader, her own cells were waging a war against her, a hidden decay that no power or status could stop. This entire magnificent burial, one of the greatest displays of wealth in Viking history, was for a woman whose final years were a private agony of chronic pain and terminal disease. And in that context, one of the strangest artifacts in the grave suddenly makes horrifying sense. Found in a small leather pouch on her person were cannabis seeds. For years, this was interpreted as evidence she was a vulva, a seeress, using the plant for ritual trances. But with the cancer diagnosis, a more tragic and deeply human possibility emerges. Was this the tool of a mystic, or was it the medicine of a dying woman? A desperate, last-ditch attempt to find a moment's relief from the pain that was consuming her from the inside out. Her story is a chilling reminder that even for a queen, life could be a secret horror. But she wasn't alone in that tomb. And the story of the woman buried beside her is, in some ways, even more disturbing. The agonizing, secret sickness of the queen is a story powerful enough on its own, a brutal counter-narrative to the gilded myth of the Oseberg burial. But the tomb holds another secret, another body, that of a second, younger woman, estimated to be in her early 52nd. For 100 years, the explanation was simple and convenient. She was a handmaiden, a loyal servant who followed her mistress into the afterlife as a sign of ultimate devotion. It's a tidy story that fits the romanticized version of the Viking world, but it's a lie. The first clue that something was deeply wrong with this picture came not from an artifact, but from a microscopic strand of her genetic code. A 2007 DNA analysis, a tool unimaginable to the grave's original excavators, yielded a result that was considered impossible. This woman was not Scandinavian. Her mitochondrial DNA, passed down through her maternal line, belongs to haplogroup U7, a genetic signature that originates not in the cold north, but thousands of miles away in the region of the Black Sea and the Near East. Let that sink in. A woman of foreign, likely Persian, origin was buried with immense honor in one of the most sacred and spectacular Viking tombs in Norway. Who was she? Was she a high-status political bride brought from the East? Or was she a slave, a piece of exotic property captured on a far-flung raid and brought back to Scandinavia? The forensic evidence only deepens the mystery and the dread. An examination of her skeleton revealed a significant and deeply suspicious injury. Her clavicle, her collarbone, had been broken, and crucially, The bone showed clear signs of healing, indicating the break had happened 2 to 3 weeks before her death. What does this mean? An accident seems unlikely. In the context of a ritual burial, another, far more sinister possibility emerges. Was she a human sacrifice, deliberately and brutally injured, to ensure she couldn't escape in the weeks leading up to the Queen's funeral rite? We are now faced with a disturbing tableau. A dying elderly queen and a younger foreign woman with a fresh, violent injury, both sealed together for eternity in a magnificent tomb. The neat story of a queen and her servant is gone. In its place is a grim mystery that hints at the brutal realities of power, status, and the violent fate of outsiders in the Viking world. A fate we will see play out in even more horrific detail. The violent mystery of the foreign woman in the Oseberg grave pulls us deep into the world of ritual and sacrifice. But to focus only on the spectacular deaths of the elite is to miss the silent, grinding horror of daily life for the vast majority of Viking women. To find their story, we must leave the gilded tombs behind and look into the simple, unadorned graves of the common people. Here, there are no sagas, no treasures, no rune stones to tell their tales. There are only bones. And those bones scream. The truth of their lives is not in texts, but written directly into their skeletons in a language of stress and strain. Can you imagine working so hard that your muscles literally reshape your bones? It sounds like an exaggeration, but forensic archaeologists see it constantly in the remains of Viking-age women. Every time a muscle pulls against a bone, it creates microscopic stress. Over a lifetime of relentless, repetitive motion, this stress builds up, creating rough patches and pronounced ridges called musculoskeletal stress markers, and female skeletons from this period are covered in them. Their clavicles, their scapulae, their upper arm bones all show heavily developed muscle attachment sites, particularly for the deltoid and pectoral muscles. This wasn't from swinging a sword. This was the signature of a lifetime spent at the rotary quern, a heavy, primitive stone mill, grinding grain for hours every single day. It was the signature of processing wool, a physically demanding task that involved beating, spinning, and weaving enough coarse, heavy fabric to create a single sail for a longship, a monumental undertaking. In study after study, the bone density and muscularity markers on these non-elite female skeletons are often comparable to, and sometimes even rival, those of the non-elite men buried right beside them. The romantic image of the Viking woman as a proud household manager is a fantasy. The reality for most was a life of grueling physical labor that started in childhood and ended in an early grave. Their bodies used as engines for the entire Viking economy. The evidence of this crushing toil is etched all over their skeletons. But there is one specific, microscopic detail, a pattern of damage found in a place you would never expect, that reveals the true, desperate extent of their daily struggle in a way that is both shocking and profoundly sad. The evidence of a life of crushing labor is etched across their skeletons, from their shoulders to their arms. But the most intimate and disturbing proof of their daily struggle is found right here. Look at the teeth. Across countless Viking-age burial sites, archaeologists consistently find a specific and horrifying pattern of dental wear, overwhelmingly present in female remains. The front incisors are worn down, sometimes horizontally, creating a flat, unnatural surface. In older women, this wear is often so extreme that the enamel is completely gone, the dentin is exposed, and in some cases, the tooth is worn down straight to the pulp. For years, this was a mystery, attributed to a rough diet. But modern microscopic analysis of the tooth surfaces revealed the truth. The fine, parallel grooves etched into the worn enamel are not from chewing food. They are the unmistakable signature of pulling thread and sinew. They were using their own mouths as a third hand. Picture it. Holding the raw fibers in place with your teeth while your hands are busy spinning or weaving, hour after hour, day after day, from the time you are a young girl. The constant friction slowly, painfully, grinds away at the very structure of your teeth. It's a level of desperate practicality that is hard to comprehend. Their bodies were not just their own. They were tools, instruments of production for the family, for the community. Every part of them was utilized to its breaking point and beyond. This wasn't a single act of violence. It was a slow, grinding form of self-mutilation born out of relentless necessity. The pain must have been a constant companion, a dull ache in the jaw that flared into agony with every meal. This slow, internal destruction, this wearing away of the self in the service of survival, is a unique and profound kind of horror. It reveals a world without comfort, without respite, and yet, for all its misery, this was the life of a free woman. For an entire class of people below them, the enslaved, this slow decay would have been a luxury. They faced a far more immediate and brutal form of violence, one recorded not just in their bones, but in the cold-blooded accounts of those who witnessed it. The slow, grinding pain of a laborer's life, written in her very teeth, feels like the ultimate hardship. But it wasn't. For an entire class of people in the Viking world, a life of work that ended in a bed, however humble, was a privilege they would never know. For the enslaved, known as thralls, life was utterly disposable. And in Flakstad, Norway, archaeologists found the cold, hard proof of what that really meant. They found a pit. We must be precise with our language here. This was not a grave, dug with reverence or ceremony. It was a hole in the ground, a place for refuse. And inside, they found the remains of 10 human beings, a mix of men and women unceremoniously dumped like garbage. All of them had been decapitated, a mass killing, a mass burial, but the true horror wasn't revealed until the bones were brought into the lab. Forensic analysis of the cervical vertebrae, the neck bones, uncovered a detail that is profoundly disturbing. The cut marks from the blades that killed them came predominantly from the front of the neck, not the back. Let that settle in. This wasn't a clean, swift execution from behind, the kind you might grant a captured enemy warrior or a convicted criminal. This was a messy, brutal, face-to-face slaughter. It was designed to terrorize. It was a display of absolute, contemptuous power over human life. This pit wasn't just a grave, it was a statement. This is what we do to people we consider less than human. For centuries, the stories of ritual sacrifice and the brutal subjugation of thralls were dismissed by many historians as exaggerated horror stories told by outsiders. But the forensic evidence from the Flakstad pit changes everything. It is the silent archaeological proof that the most shocking accounts were not only possible, but likely happened. It gives a terrifying new weight to the words of that one eyewitness, Ibn Fadlan, who stood on that riverbank in 922 CE. He didn't just see a sacrifice. He documented a precise, ritualized methodology of murder. And now, with the grim reality of Flakstad as our backdrop, it is time to hear the rest of his story. The pit at Flakstad gives us the cold, forensic proof of a massacre. It shows us the brutal end result. But it cannot show us the how. It cannot show us the ritual, the faces of the killers, or the terror of the final moments. For that, we must return to the one man who saw it happen and wrote it down. Remember the man who heard the shields? The Arab diplomat, Ibn Fadlan. We held back the full horror of his account, but now, with the grim evidence from the mass grave to back it up, you need to hear what he actually saw. He described how the slave girl, after days of ritual preparation, was led to the chieftain's funeral ship where a deathbed had been prepared. She was given a final, intoxicating drink. Then, 2 men seized her by her hands and feet. An old woman, whom the Rus's Vikings called the Angel of Death, placed a cord around the girl's neck and handed the ends to 2 other men to pull in opposite directions. As they began to strangle her, the old woman drew a broad-bladed dagger. While the men pulled the cord tight, she began to stab the girl repeatedly between the ribs, plunging the dagger in and pulling it out, again and again. Strangled and stabbed, simultaneously, and all the while, other men beat their shields with sticks. Not out of ritual fervor, but for one specific, practical, and monstrous reason: to drown out the sound of her screaming so that others would not be afraid to die in the same way. This is not a horror story. This is a diplomatic report. A meticulous, step-by-step description of a ritualized murder where every action was deliberate. The forensics from graves like Flakstad, with their evidence of brutal, face-to-face violence, tell us his account wasn't an exaggeration. It was a documented reality. This was the true fate of the enslaved. Her body was not her own in life, and it was not her own in death. It was a prop, a ritual object to be publicly and brutally destroyed in a terrifying display of power. This seems like the absolute lowest point, the ultimate expression of a woman's disposability in the Viking world. But what if it isn't the whole story? What if, at this exact same time in history, another woman existed who was the complete opposite of this sacrificed girl? A woman who wasn't a victim of violence, but a master of it. This is the absolute bedrock of horror, the ultimate fate for a woman in a world where she could be deemed property. The story should end here, with the screams of the slave girl and the cold reality of the mass grave, but it doesn't. Because history is never that simple. At the exact same time that women were being ritually murdered on riverbanks, another woman's story was being buried in the ground, a story that would lie dormant for 1,000 years, waiting for science to finally read it. The story begins in Birka, Sweden, a major trading hub of the Viking world. In the 1872, archaeologists excavated a spectacular chamber grave, designated BJ 581. The occupant was buried sitting up, surrounded by the complete arsenal of a professional warrior. A sword, an axe, a spear, a battle knife, 2 shields, and a quiver of armor-piercing arrows designed to rain death from a distance. At their side were 2 horses, a mare and a stallion, the sign of a high-ranking cavalry officer, and resting in their lap was a full set of gaming pieces. This wasn't just a soldier, this was a commander, a strategist responsible for tactics and leadership. For over 140 years, this grave was the textbook example of an elite male Viking warrior. But there was always a problem. The skeleton itself seemed gracile. The facial bones and pelvis didn't quite fit the masculine ideal. In 2017, a team of scientists decided to end the debate. They extracted ancient DNA from a tooth root and the upper arm bone. The results were unambiguous, and they sent a shockwave through the world of Viking studies. The analysis confirmed the presence of 2 X chromosomes and a complete absence of a Y chromosome. The ultimate Viking warrior, the symbol of masculine power and military authority buried in Birka, was a woman. This one, verifiable, biological fact incinerates a century of assumptions. It's not a saga, not a myth. It is a forensic certainty. The long-dismissed stories of shieldmaidens suddenly have a grim and powerful reality standing behind them. The woman in this grave was not just buried like a warrior. She lived the life of one. She was tall, about 5'7", and she was a professional soldier, a leader of men, buried with the tools of her trade. This is not a woman who could ever be a thrall. She was the one who created them. She is the impossible contradiction. A female general in a world that ritually murdered slave girls. A strategist buried with honor in an age where other women were dumped nameless into pits. The warrior of Birka does not erase the story of the sacrificed thrall on the Volga. She makes it even more complex and far more disturbing. So who were they? Were they laborers ground down to the bone? Were they human sacrifices? Or were they generals leading armies into battle? The answer is, they were all of them. The secret life of Viking women is a universe of contradiction. There was no single female experience, only a brutal calculus of power, birthright, and violence that determined your fate. You could be a queen like the woman of Oseberg, entombed in staggering wealth but trapped in a body ravaged by cancer. You could be her companion, a mysterious foreigner with a broken bone whose story will never be known. You could be an anonymous laborer, your entire life of toil recorded only in the wear patterns on your teeth. You could be a thrall, your life worth less than a ritual, your death a public spectacle of horror. Or you could be the woman in grave BH 581, a commander who wielded the same deadly power that subjugated so many others. The sagas and official histories chose to remember the myths and omit the inconvenient realities. They gave us a fantasy, but the bones do not lie. These skeletons, re-examined with modern science, are the only true records left behind by these women. And they prove with chilling certainty that the past you think you know is a carefully constructed lie.